Thanks, Shavua Tov. Like I was mentioning before, you guys really know how to party on a Saturday night. Nothing better than getting together to study some Tanakh. I do want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of 11 holy souls who were gunned down in their synagogue last Shabbat in Pittsburgh. I was mentioning to Jesse that my wife and I lived in Squirrel Hill for 2 years. And so that shul is 4 blocks away from our house. I do remember one of the people who was killed. And so for some of us this hit home a little bit closer, but for all of us this has hit home very closely. And has had an impact and will continue to have an impact in lots of ways. One thing that I hope and pray is, besides all of the steps that we're learning to take, including about security, that we can take a page from the tremendous unity that we've experienced this week among Klal Yisrael, and the tremendous response of the community of Pittsburgh, including the non-Jewish community of Pittsburgh, and the way that they've responded. I don't know if you noticed, but the official, semi-official logo of the response with the Pittsburgh Steelers logo with the words "stronger than hate." The Pittsburgh Penguins changed their logo to add a triangle so that there's a Jewish star on their logo. Wow. Which I can tell you, from having lived in Pittsburgh, that is Pittsburgh. That's very much what it's about. But the tremendous, and there's no better word for it, outpouring the Jewish community around the country. I called some friends in Pittsburgh on Wednesday because our school wanted to send me and a few students to go to the community to show signs of solidarity, and the response was, stay home. We have so many people who have come in, we don't have what for them to do. The response has been such an outpouring of love and support and unity. And if we could take a page from that and just remember, and if you come away with nothing else tonight, but with this sentence, then it'll be worth it. And that is, what unites us is far greater than what divides us. Just remember that and pass it on. Meantime, we're going to learn some Torah in the memory, and we'll learn some Torah, and hopefully there'll be a few other things we come home with. I want to take a look at 2 different topics that take place over the course of the next few weeks of Parashot. We've begun reading Parashat Toledot today, and a week from now we'll be reading Parashat Vayetzei. We'll look at some things that take place over those 2 sets of stories that really are the stories of Yitzchak and Yaakov. Already by the end of Parashat Vayishlach, we're moving into the area of Bnei Yaakov. And there are 2, I guess we would call them chronological bleeps or blips in the story. One of a nature of sequencing and one of a nature simply of time. We're going to divide the shiur for purposes of sequencing and time into 2 parts. The first one is the first source sheet, which says Yitzchak Rivka Bigrar, and that is very much about Parashat Toldot. That's very much about issues of sequence. We already read this afternoon the beginning of Parashat Toldot. At the beginning of Parashat Toldot, we are told about Yitzchak marrying Rivka. We're told that they are barren for 20 years, and then after 20 years she has children. She's upset during her pregnancy and goes to Hashem, whether that's a Navi or directly to Hashem, and is told the very famous Nevuah Shnei Goyim V'Vitnech, we're all familiar with it, and the birth of these children. And the children already grow up and go into their different livelihoods, and that piece of the story ends with the story of Yaakov and Esav and the Bechorah and the sale of the Bechorah. And that is the first parasha that you see on page 1. And then, a story that we began reading today, but that occupies almost all of chapter 26, is the one chapter in all of Chumash Bereshit that's devoted to Yitzchak. I happen to take this personally as a Yitzchak. I'm glad we made it through the Akedah without any more bloodshed, but it is upsetting that really Yitzchak, as one wag once said it, is more known as being Abraham's son and Yaakov's father than anything else. And there is one story, one parak devoted to the stories of Yitzchak, and that is Parak Chavav. But when you look at this story, there is something glaring, very problematic. There is a glaring issue in this story. We'll read it through. Now this sounds familiar. Yitzchak goes down to Gerar. Now why does Yitzchak go to Gerar? Where does Yitzchak live? Yitzchak lives evidently in Bereshit. And where is Yitzchak intending to go during the famine? Where everybody goes during a famine, which is Mitzrayim. He's following his father's footsteps. Now Hashem stops him and says, don't go down to Egypt. And there's, just reading carefully, there's a little bit of a switch here also. God says, Shchon ba'aretz, which means live. And then he says, Gur ba'aretz hazot, which means be here as a stranger. Lagur in Tanakh means almost the opposite of what it means in modern Hebrew, which is to reside, makom negurim. Lagur means to travel around, to be an outsider. But gur ba'aretz hazot, which is of course a play on words on the fact that what town is he in? Gerar. So gur be Gerar. Gur ba'aretz hazot ve'yeh b'cha v'racheka ki l'cha u'zarachatenu kol ha'atzot ha'elu ki motet ha'shua shenishpati l'Avram avicha. And then he says why he's giving him this great bracha. This is the land I'm giving to you. I think that gur ba'aretz hazot speaks to an essential tension that we have when regarding the land of the Plishtim. Is the land of the Plishtim part of Eretz Yisrael or not? It is, but not exactly. Because when you look at Abraham's story, all of it takes place where? Besides his travel to Gerar, which does not go well, it all takes place in the line between Beersheba and Shechem. And the land that Abraham wants Lot to remain on when they're separating is either Shechem or Hebron. Imayamin v'asmiila v'masmol v'yamina means if you go to the north, I'll go to the south. Go to the south, I'll go to the north. Lot instead goes east to Sdom, and the rest, of course, is history. So this is not exactly the heartland of Abraham's activity. So Gur ba'aretz hazot may indeed reflect that somewhat ambiguous and ambivalent feeling that we have towards the Plishti's land, and of course it's also a play on the word Gerar, and therefore you have in Pasuk Vav, Vayeshev Yitzchak b'Gerar. He actually settles in Gerar. He doesn't remain there for all that long, but he settles in. But here's where things get strange. Now you find in this story, Yitzchak going through some of the same things that Abraham went through, and I know that you're all familiar with a dear friend of mine and colleague, Rav Amnon Bazak, as he pointed out years ago in a shiur, that Yitzchak goes through some of the same things that Abraham goes through, but far more successfully. He wants to go to Egypt, but doesn't go. He says that his wife is his sister, but she never gets taken at all to the king, etc. However, Vayishalu Anshe Makom liishto Vayomer Achotihi ki harei lemor ishti tanyaguni Anshe Makom al Rivka ki tovat marehi. Again, he's afraid that Rivka is going to be taken from him and that he'll be killed. And therefore he says she's his sister. Now here's the question. How do you get away with this lie? How do you explain these two young men? The hunter and the shepherd. So of course the answer will be, well, they left them behind. Really? They left them behind during a famine? What sort of behavior is that? And by the way, if it's okay to leave people behind during a famine, then why did Abraham do that first time with Sarai, instead of the whole lie, achotihi, and all the problems with Paro? Evidently, leaving somebody behind in a famine is not an option. And leaving two of your kids behind doesn't seem to make sense. So who are these kids? How do we explain that? And evidently, Yitzchak and Rivka are sufficiently, shall we say, newlywed-ish in this picture, because how does Avimelech find out that they're married? Vayiki archuloshav hayamim, pasuk chet. Vayashkef Avimelech melech plishtim ba'al hachalon, vayar b'nei Yitzchak mitzachek et Rivka ishto. Now that's a play on words of Yitzchak. Yitzchak mitzachek et Rivka ishto. There's some young ears in the room, so we'll be careful about how we say this. But Yitzchak and Rivka are acting, shall we say, not like brother and sister outside of West Virginia. Right? Okay. I missed putting the West Virginia joke in on the load story, so I want to get it in here. So the scene of Yitzchak and Rivka is not a scene of two parents of teenage kids or older. It's a younger scene. All right, so Abraham calls Yitzchak out on it, and then later on in the parak you have this very strange thing happening, which is that Yitzchak has confrontations with the Plishtim. Now, parenthetically, you'll note that Abraham does not have such confrontations. He has a standoff against Avimelech at making a brit, but confrontations, not at all. And the Plishtim have behaved very badly, and by the way, self-destructively. They've taken wells that Abraham himself dug and they've filled them in, which benefits nobody. It's classic terrorism. Doing something just to upset somebody else, even though you don't gain anything from it, you lose. And Yitzchak has this constant confrontation with them. Parenthetically, why is it that Yitzchak is the only one of the Avot to have these sort of confrontations with the locals? So if Yoel Ben Nun points out in an article written a number of years ago that among the Avot, Yitzchak is the only one of them who is a farmer. And if you think about it, all the other livelihoods that somebody would have in the time of Tanakh are livelihoods that very easily, if need be, you could take and move. A shepherd can easily move. Just take the sheep, get them out of Dodge. If you are an artisan, you pick up your tent, pick up your tools and go. If you're a merchant, you're always on the run. A farmer is the only one who has to stand his ground. And Yitzchak is the only farmer that we have in the family. Till Esav, by the way. And so Yitzchak, therefore, is more confrontational because that's the nature of a farmer. He's going to stand on his land. And Yitzchak has these confrontations with the Plishtim. But here's the question. Who is Yitzchak's favorite son? Esav. What does Esav do for a living? He's a hunter. So why isn't Esav hiding behind a tree, dressed like Jack Bauer, taking down some Plishtim? You guys remember Jack Bauer?
Yes.
Yeah. Taking down some, I guess I should say Jack Ryan now. You have to keep up with the time. Taking down some Plishtim for his father. He loves his father, he's devoted to his father, and he's a hunter. Where is he in this entire scene? It's very strange. And when you look to the end of the parak at the bottom of the page, you'll see Vahi Esav ben Arbaim Shana v'yikach ishat Yehudit bat Beiri Hachiti v'et Basmat bat Elon Hachiti v'atiyan Ruach liYitzchak u'Rivka. So the simple read of the text has that we first hear about Yitzchak and Rivka being married, then 20 years of barrenness, switch ahead 20 years, the birth of the boys, switch ahead to sometime, Chazal say 15 years, some point in there where they've grown up enough and have started their separate livelihoods, and the negotiations over the Bechorah. And then, after that's happened, Yitzchak and Rivka go to Pleshet because of a famine. Esav and Yaakov we just don't hear about. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they're surviving during the famine. They're not present. Yitzchak and Rivka appear to be newlyweds, and Yitzchak does not have a son to help him out. And when the whole thing is over, flash forward and pick up the story of Esav. Esav is now 40, he gets married. So, what? They're all in college, right? Good. Okay. We are all familiar with the principle from Masachet Psachim, Tavchet. We're all familiar with it, whether from Psachim or elsewhere, which is Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah. What does Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah mean? What does that mean?
Not chronological.
It's not chronological. So, just starting with the end of Parshat Chayei Sarah, which we had this morning, we're going to touch back on. At the end of Parshat Chayei Sarah, we hear, after the whole story about the marriage of Rivka to Yitzchak, we hear that Abraham takes another wife, has a bunch more kids. Suddenly, at the end of his life, Abraham's doing the Eschal Gadol B'Gadol. And then Abraham dies. At what age? 175. And then we find out about Yishmael, and Yishmael dies at what age? 137. So let's use Yishmael right now as an example. Yishmael 137, how old is Yitzchak when Yishmael is 137? 123. Okay, good, 123. Yitzchak is 123 at that point. Go back to the beginning of Parshat Toldot, and Yitzchak is 40. Wow, he got to Florida quick. Fountain of Youth. Ponce de Leon. Sorry. How did Yitzchak become 40 when he was 123? The answer is Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah. But the critical point of Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah is you can't just use it as a get-out-of-jail-free card every time you want to explain some anomaly in the text. You've got to have a good explanation for why Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah. Meaning, why is that principle being used here? So in the example I just gave, there's a very simple answer. The style of Tanakh is to give a biography and finish the biography and move on to the next person. And not necessarily to say, meanwhile back at the ranch, and keep you in sequenced order, but in chronological sequence, which is true, but make you very confused. So when we finished the necessary part of Abraham's career, we then speed up. He has a bunch of kids, he lives this long, he dies, Yitzchak and Yishmael bury him, see ya. And then we do the same with Yishmael, because Yishmael is of very little interest to us in Tanakh. Because he's a bad guy, Yishmael is more of a tragic character than anything else, but he's not our interest. And therefore, we tie it up. Yishmael has 12 kids, which by the way is important because Nahor also had 12, and Mituah had 12. And that number 12 is going to be in the back of our head. We're saying, when are we going to have 12? And that's Yaakov. But otherwise, we don't really care about him. So we finish off with Ishmael. Now let's go back and tell the Yitzchak story, which, by the way, took place well before Avraham died, because Yitzchak is exactly 100 years younger than his father. So however old Yitzchak is, add a 1 to it. So when Yitzchak is 40, Avram's 140. I don't know how well he danced at the wedding, but 140. When Rivka gives birth, Avram's still alive at 160. Which is why Chazal say what they do, that the day of the lentils was the day that Avraham died, at 15, when they were 15, 175. The math works. But the Torah wants to finish off and tie in a neat little bow the Avraham story and go back and tell the Yitzchak story. I'm fine with that. And I understand that Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah is employed for various reasons. In the particular case of Parshat Yitro, where the machloket really becomes very strong between Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, it has its own rationale. We won't go into it now. I'm going to suggest, but now I really got a job to defend this, that Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah is what's informing our read of Parshat Toldot. Please turn the page. As you see at the top of the page, I wrote, the solution begins at the end of Parshat Chayei Sarah. And there you have the story of Abraham again, finishing that story, even though it took place well before Yitzchak, even though it took place well after Yitzchak was married and had kids. And then you have the story of Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak. Now, this looks like the same text, but it's not. It is the same text, but it's rearranged. So I'm going to read it. You raise your hand or yell out or scream or throw something. Well, don't throw anything at me. When you catch what I've done with the text. Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid Yitzchak. V'hi Yitzchak ben 40 shana b'kachtot v'ivka b'Betuel ha'arami, v'padan aram achot Lavan ha'arami lo li'isha. V'hi ra'av ba'aretz. You got it. Because here's another question you want to ask. What happened during the 20 years? Yitzchak marries Rivka when he's 40. They're barren, he prays, she gets pregnant, but it's 20 years until that happens. What happened in the 20 years? Now you can easily say nothing, which of course doesn't mean nothing. Things happen, nothing that we care about. What happened between the time Avram was 86 and 99? Nothing. Meaning, we jumped from 86 to 99. Ishmael was born and then Brit. Alright, so nothing important happened. I could make that argument. But I'm not going to. I'm going to suggest that what we read about in chapter 26 is an explanation of the 20 intervening years. And I've got to defend it. So read it as follows. Yitzchak marries Rivka at 40. He's 40. We don't know how old she is. The Midrash says 14. That works out. All right, and for 20 years they are childless. And in the meantime, what happens when they are childless? She's a young, beautiful bride. They go down to Mitzrayim because of famine. God stops them and says, stay in Gerar. Yitzchak, following Minhag HaMishpacha, says, she's my sister. Right? Avimelech doesn't do anything about it. And then before he does something about it, he looks through the window and sees them behaving like newlyweds, like a young couple. Where's Esav to defend him? Not around. Doesn't exist yet. Yitzchak then stays in Gerar, because God said, Gur ba'aretz hazot. He also said, Shchon ba'aretz hazot. Vayeshiv Yitzchak b'Gerar. And he starts planting. And he settles in. And he's very successful. And this is, by the way, in a time of famine. And he finds me'ash she'arim, 100 times as much as he planted comes up, or 100 times as much as it's expected from the bounty. However we interpret me'ash she'arim, one thing we know is it's not 100 gates. And has confrontations with the police team. And he moves around, and he's got slaves, and they dig wells, and all is fine. And this is Yitzchak, the young man, building up his capital. Building up his wealth in advance of having kids. Now, at the very end of that story, Avimelech comes to him in Beersheba, and they make a brit. Yitzchak doesn't want to make a brit, so instead he makes a shvuah. And again, the name of the town is accorded. Al-Kain, Shem Ha'ir Beersheba Ad Hayom Hazeh. And then, Vayata Yitzchak L'Adonai L'Nochach Ishto. Now they're back in Beersheba, having gone through all of this tumult with the Plishtim, having gotten an oath from Avimelech, having built up a lot of capital, and made a name for himself as a guy you don't want to mess with, and a guy who's very successful, and a guy who's blessed by God. And now he prays to God, and God answers the prayer. She becomes pregnant. She has the twins. Esav grows up to be a hunter and a man of the field. Yaakov grows up to be a Yoshev Ohalim. What's Pshat Yoshev Ohalim? Pshat. I'm allowed to say that word in Brooklyn, I learned. What? Yoshev Ohalim? He's a shepherd. He's a shepherd. He's a farmer. By the way, that's the oldest dichotomy that exists. Goes back to Cain and Hevel. Right? And continues throughout. And as a result of that, they go their separate ways. As a result of that, the Bechorah, etc. What happens? Please take a look at the bottom of the page. Vayomer Yaakov Yishava li kayom Yishava lo vayimkor bechorato liYaakov. V'Yaakov natan leEsav lechem u'nzir arashim vayochal vayesh vayakom vayilach v'yivez Esav et haBechorah v'hi Esav ben 40 shana v'yikach isha, etc. In other words, at the end of the story that we read today about the sale of the Bechorah, the very next line is the end of Parak Chavav, which if you look in a Sefer Torah, and even on page 1, is a separate parasha. It's broken off. Esav's marriage is a separate parasha. The whole story of Vayira Baretz until the oath in Beersheba is one story. And then a separate story is the marriage of Esav. Why? Because that's happening after all of that. So now you're going to say to me, very nice, but please defend it. Defend it means, why would the text do something like that? So what? At the end of Hayesar, we had a simple answer. It's the style of the text to finish off somebody's biography before moving on. We have lots of examples about that. Throughout the first two parashot, two Sidarim, Bereshit and Noach, we got people dying, and of course their parents are still alive because of the crazy ages. Right? In other words, the numbers don't work, at least taking the numbers at face value, don't work as being sequential. People are still alive while they're dying, but we're not concerned with that. We want to tell their story. They lived this long and they died. And then there's this one, whose life overlaps. That's okay. That's how we tell biographies. Why would the Torah do this here? So I'd like to propose, and if somebody else has another proposal, I'm certainly happy to hear it. I'd like to propose that the story of the birth of Yaakov and Esav is a necessary story to hear right here. And it's because of what happened just before. Because the text feels the need. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to tell Moshe, write this down, the story of Yishmael and Yishmael's numbers. And by the way, why do we need to know Yishmael's numbers? Because, what did Hashem say to Abraham? V'gam et Yishmael, right? Because Zerachahu. I'm going to make him a great nation because he's yours. We have to see the fulfillment of that. And by the way, we're not going to come back to Yishmael in Vayikra. Not our interest. So if we don't deal with him now, it's never. And so at this point, after we tell the story of Abraham's life and his death and being buried by Yitzchak v'Yishmael, we finish the Yishmael story. Shnei Masar Nesiim, he has 12 princes, and here are their names. Very nice. I want you to picture what it looks like. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to Abraham in Perek Yod Zayin when he said that Sarai is going to have a child? So Abraham laughs. So what is that? And he says, Lu Yishmael Yichel Lefanecha. What is Hashem's answer to Abraham? Aval Sarai Shtachal Lechabem, Karta Shmon Yitzchak. And he is going to be the future. What happens in Perek Chaf Aleph when Abraham is torn by Sarah's demand to send that child away? We assume it's Ishmael. To send that Nar away. And what does Hashem say to him? Kol asher tamar l'cha Sarah shema b'kola ki Yitzchak yikareh l'chazara. Yitzchak is the future. Okay, we're reading that. We know it. It's in the back of our heads, the front of our heads, our awareness throughout the first part of Bereshit. Abraham's going to have a great nation, but the most significant part of that nation is going to be through Yitzchak. Nation means kids. And here we read Yishmael, who is the Oisvarf. Oisvarf is other part of Brooklyn for outcast. Outcast. How do you say it in Arabic? Oisvarf? Must be a word. What? I think it's caught. You'll tell me later. Okay. So Yishmael is the outcast. I'm going to stay on par with him. Yishmael is the outcast. Has 12 kids. What about Yitzchak? Yeah, first there's a famine, and then there's a wife-sister story, and then there's a confrontation with the police team. No. Right now we need to hear about it. So what does the text do? It jumps ahead and tells us Yitzchak also has kids. And by the way, what kind of kids are they? Not just kids. Shnei goyim. Shnei leumim. They are going to be mighty and powerful nations who will wrestle with each other. And we're familiar with the other part of the Nevuah, the part that we have been suffering and struggling with for our whole history. But the text doesn't want to leave us with this really terrible impression that be Yishmael Yikareh L'Chazara. And Yishmael is the one who has the 12. And Yitzchak, no kids. So what does the text do? It immediately, as soon as we hear about Yishmael's children, it tells us about Yitzchak's children. But Yitzchak's children, just like Avraham and Sarah took a long wait, Yitzchak and Rivka took a long wait. And now let's fill in what happened during that long wait that helps explain the relationship with the Plishtim, which is going to play out in David's time, to help explain the relationship between Yitzchak and Esav, because Esav is also an Ish Sadeh, so we understand why they have a particularly close relationship. To explain the name Be'er Sheva, because of the Shvuah taken there. All of these other things that happened during those 20 years. But we don't need to get to them right away. So what the text does here is to immediately jump ahead 20 years, tell us about the birth of the boys, the first significant story which supports the Nevuah, La'om mila'om ya'amatz v'rav ya'avod sa'ir, is already presented in our story. And then we go back and fill in 20 years. When we're done with the 20 years, we pick up where that story left off and jump immediately to Esav's marriage at the age of 40. That brings us to the end of part 1. And the Esav's marriage at the end of 40 is actually going to be a key piece to part 2. So, without even a commercial break, we'll go to part 2. How long was Yaakov in Laban's household?
20 years.
20 years. 20 years, right? We all know Yaakov was in Laban's household 20 years because he says he was there 20 years. And if you can't believe Yaakov, I'm not going to finish the sentence. Now, Please take a look at source 2 on the page. It's the new page. What does Yaakov say to Lavan at their face-off at the end on Har Gilad? Zeh 20 shana anochi imach. What does that mean? What does that mean? 20 years I've been with you. Rechelecha vizecha lo shikelu ve'leitzoncha lo achalti tcheifa lo eveti elecha nochi achatam me'yaldi tevakshena genu v'tiyom genu v'tilayla. He talks about his tremendous dedication and all the hardships he went through. Hayiti ve'yam achalani chor v'kerach balav v'dirat shnatim me'enai. Zeh li 20 shana b'meitacha. He says it again. I was in with you for 20 years. Avaticha 14 shana b'shtei v'notecha. 14 years I worked for your 2 daughters. V'shesh shanim b'tzonecha. And for 6 years for the flock. Tzonecha is a little bit of a shtoch because I got a lot of your flock during those 6 years because of the stripe, spotted, etc. So now, Yaakov says I was there for 20 years. That makes him there for 20 years. Let's do a little math. We're going to do math in 2 ways. The first one is simply aging. Let's start backwards. How old is Yaakov when he leaves home? You're right, we got no idea. We don't know. We're not told. How old is Yaakov when Reuben is born? You're right, we got no idea. We actually do know how old Yaakov is when Yosef is born. How do we know that? Because we do know how old Yaakov is when he comes to Mitzrayim. Because he says how old he is. We have to believe him. And he says, how old am I? Please take a look at, I don't have it on the page, but I think we all know the pasuk, which is, Yimei Shnei Chayai, Me'ah U'Shloshim Shana. Me'at V'ra'im Hayu, Yimei Shnei Chayai, I've got a terrible life. Now I'm only 130. Already on Social Security. 130. He's 130 when he arrives there. Let's continue doing the math. How old is Yosef when Yaakov arrives? Well, how old is Yosef when he is brought out of prison to interpret Yaakov's dreams? 30 years old. We know that. When do the years of plenty begin? Immediately. So how old is Yosef when the years of plenty are over? 37. How far into the famine does the family go to Egypt? Zeshnatayim hara'av b'karav ha'aretz. Which means how old is Yosef when the family comes down? 39. And Yaakov is 130. Let's go backwards. So how old was Yaakov when Yosef was born? 91. That's really good for Ben Zekunim. I'll take that. So Yaakov is 91 when Yosef is born. Fine. That age we have. But that means that if Yaakov has been in the house for 20 years, when did he arrive? He doesn't leave when Yosef is born. He leaves when Yosef has been there for 6 years. After Yosef is born, he comes up to Lavan and says, I'd like to go back. And then Lavan says, what do you want to say? Bracha. And then Yaakov says, now I've got to make for my household. And for 6 more years, he works there. Which means how old was he when he arrived? 77. Good. But that means that means that he left home when he was 77. Yeah. So we've got the Midrash that for 14 years he was hanging out in Yeshiva Shel Shem Va'ever. That's fine with me. But that means he left home when he was 63. So one question I just want to put in the back of our minds. Yaakov had been given a bracha at some point and knew the bracha, the family bracha, which was Goy Gadol. And I got news for you. Sometimes you marry a barren woman, it happens in Tanakh, but you gotta start by getting married. It's the old story about the guy who keeps praying to God to win the lottery. And he never wins. And finally one day God says to him, meet me halfway, buy a ticket. You can't get there without getting married. What's Yaakov doing single this whole time? That's question one, we'll leave that on the side. But that means Yaakov finally arrives in Lavan's house when he's 77. But he doesn't marry right away. When does he marry? When he's 84. Okay, not bothered by getting married when you're 84. Somebody once told me this story about the Yemenite community was well known for its longevity. And there was a story that happened in the Yemenite community when somebody arrived in Israel, And there was a guy who was in his 70s, and he came to do Bituach Lumi to get signed up. He just made Aliyah. I came to sign up, and they said you have to take get a medical exam to be signed up for insurance. He said, I can't come to the medical exam next week because my father's getting married. Your father's getting married? I don't understand. He said, yeah, his parents keep bugging him. When are you going to find him? I'm not bothered by 84, really not. But I am bothered by this. Please turn the sheet, and this is a summary of what Midrash Seder Olam at the bottom of the first page. This is the summary of Midrash Seder Olam. By the way, Midrash Seder Olam starts by building its case with the story of Yishmael. He says, Lama minu shnotav shel Yishmael. Why do I care how long Yishmael lived? And the answer is, liachef ben shnotav shel Yaakov. In order to be able to figure out how old Yaakov was. Why? Because Yishmael was 137 when he died. And at the end of Parashat Toldot, when Esav sees that his wives are not pleasing to his parents, he takes a cousin, Machalat Bat Yishmael, who's also identified as Achot Nevayot. And so Midrash Seder Olam says, why is she identified also as Achot Nevayot? Because Yishmael betrothed her off, but wasn't there for the wedding because he died. Which means, when did Esav die? Esav died when Esav got married. This other marriage, which happened just when Yaakov ran away, happened when Yishmael died. And how old is Yishmael when he died? 137. So how old is Yitzchak? 123. And Yitzchak's 60 years older than the twins, so the twins are 63. So Yaakov was 63, but how could he be 63 if he's 77 when he gets to Beit Lavan? The answer is 14 years he was in Yeshiva Shel Eber. That's the thing. However, the Midrash also has to deal with the problem, which is, how do we account for the births? So here's a chart I made. Basically, it summarizes what Seder Olam says. Okay? How many kids were born in years 1 through 7? None. Okay? Now, let's assume here that the minute that Yaakov has relations with one of his wives, that wife gets pregnant. And the pregnancy is successful. There's no miscarriages. Okay, we can buy that. So that means Reuven is born at 8.7. See the chart. We're also going to assume something else, which is that the minute that Reuven is born, not the minute, but within a day, Yaakov and Leah have relations again, and she gets pregnant again, and it's successful. I mean, I am being the most extreme on this. Now, I am not allowing here for preemies. That would be one way to kind of push things a little bit tighter, but take a look. Actually, I am. I'm doing all of this on preemies. I apologize. I'm doing all of this on preemies. All of them are 7-month-old, which is what, in Chazal's time, is the acceptable range for preemies. 7 months. So 7 months, Reuben is born. Immediately afterwards, Shimon is born at 2 months of the 9th year. And you see the whole chart. Now, if you follow the text through, Yaakov marries Leah, and then Zilpah comes along with that one. And then, how much later does he marry Rachel? A week later, he marries Rachel, and Bilhah comes along with that one. Fine. Yaakov immediately. Now, by the way, the interesting thing is, he's married to Leah for a week when he marries Rachel, and the text says, Vayara Adonai ki snua Leah vayiftach rachma. Snua means she's disfavored. But according to this, it has to be immediate anyways. Alright? Fine. We'll buy it. Immediate. So that means Reuben is born 7 months after they get married. Shimon is born 14 months after they got married. Levi is born 21 months after they get married. Yehuda now 28 months after they get married. You see the numbers here. Now, after Yehuda is born, Rachel comes up to Yaakov and says, Havali Vanim. And that leads to Bilhah. And again, if we want to do the preemie thing, Bilhah, then Dan is born where he's born. Naphtali is born 7 months later. And then Leah turns around and says, hey, that looks like a pretty good idea. And so God is born at the end of 12 years. Asher is born 12 years and 7 months. And then immediately, by the way, Yaakov goes out to the field, comes back. Reuven brought his mom the Dudayim, that whole story. Yisachar and Zvulun, boom, boom, boom. There's just no waiting time in between any of this. Now, by the way, notice that after Zvulun, we still got another birth to take into account, which is Dinah. It's a great forgotten member of the family, but Dinah. And then you could have Yosef born at the very end of 14 years. I'm sorry, but this really, really, really stretches the imagination. Have all of these things happen, which is immediate pregnancies, no miscarriages, 7-month pregnancies for all 4 of the wives, and successful.
The four different mothers, they
What?
simultaneous. I mean,
So if it's simultaneous, you have a little bit of a solution. You still don't have a full solution, right? But if it's simultaneous, then the text is misleading, because when does Rachel come up to Yaakov and say, "V'tekanei Rachel ba'achota, v'tomer hava li banim"? When is that? That's presented after the birth of Yehuda. Why? Why not after the birth of Reuben? It evidently happens after the birth of Yehuda. In other words, the Torah tells us in a sequence, because evidently it's happening in that sequence, because it could have easily put Rachel at an earlier point, and then, by the way, once that happens, then Zilpah can be at an earlier point, and you can have these kids born and in any order. By the way, the tradition consistently assumes that this is the order of birth. Every traditional model assumes that this is the order of birth, not the timing. But that Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Sachar, Zvulun, Dinah, Yosef, Binyamin. Yeah.
Could Dinah have been a twin?
V'achar Yaldabat. What do you do with V'achar Yaldabat?
right after.
Don't think so. Don't think so. But the truth is that it's not just the timing. I mean, I think the timing is a very big problem in this. Meaning that squeezing all those births into such a thing. But it's not just the timing that's a problem. And I listed the questions. I had 10 questions. Good. All right. First of all, what's Yaakov doing till now? Why isn't he getting married? You want to say Canaanite girls are no good? So go somewhere else and find a girl. Send a slave and find a girl. What's he doing till he's 84 till he gets married? And by the way, Esau took a clue. How old was Yitzchak when he got married? 40. How old was Esau when he got married? 40. What's Yaakov doing? That's strange. Rachel, who we have in this story, is described as Yifat Torah Fat Mareh, seems to be a very, very young girl at the time. All right, that you can play with a little bit.
Why did we have to be finished at 14 years?
What?
Why did all the kids have to be born by the end of the 14
Because
years?
what happens at the end of 14 years? Yosef is born. And at that point he turns to Laban and says, I want to work to make money. He works for another 6 years. And that's where he makes his money. I'll put it a little differently. It's at the point where he comes to Laban, when Yosef is born, and says, I want to work. He works for Laban for 6 more years to make money. Take a look. You could look at all of the questions, but I think some of them are certainly strong, much stronger questions, which is...
How'd you get Rachel to 5?
What?
How'd you get Rachel to 5 years old?
Why would I think Rachel is 5? Because what does Laban say when Yaakov first approaches him? I'd like to marry, what's your sachar? I'd like to marry Rachel. Rachel b'chag kana. And what does Laban say? Tov titi ota lach v'titi ota l'ish acher, shva imadi, and work for 7 years till you marry her. Now, by the way, at what age were girls married in the ancient world? Around 12. So why would Laban lock her up for 7 marriageable years and not have her get married? It seems that she's probably 7 years back from marriageable age. Like, why else would he say 7 years?
Why
She's,
did marry a 5-year-old?
what?
Why did he even ask to marry a 5-year-old?
Okay, good. So I mean, that's a little bit of a problem in any case. But if she's... No. I'm with you. I'm bothered by it too. Although it gets everybody off the hook with the kiss. But it does. But, you tell people, no, she's 6, you can't kiss her. It's like the only night. But why would Lavan take his daughter, and he wants to have a son-in-law, that's clear, Why would he take his daughter, who evidently at whatever age is a catch, and say for 7 years she's off limits until you can marry her, unless 7 years is the amount of time till her marriageable age. You want to make her a little older, make her 7 or 8, that's fine. She's not a teenager already, because in the ancient world, if you're a teenager and you're not married, you're a girl and teenager not married, you're either coming from a criminal family or something hideously wrong with you. And I mean, again, the ancient world, we gotta be playing with their culture, their society.
But was it normal for an 84-year-old to marry a 12-year-old?
It was, shall we say, not maybe the most normal thing, but it was not unheard of for a man to have multiple wives and take them. We assume also that Keturah was not an old lady. She had a bunch of kids, and Avram was 140.
Right.
So, you know.
Yemenites are doing it till today.
There we go.
But also Leah, he wants to get his older daughter married, and that's why he's...
Yeah, so it may be that his thinking was, by the time the 7 years come up, Leah will be already married. Which means, by the way, Yaakov should have been paying attention and said, well, Leah's not married yet, not going to marry Rachel first. And by the way, in that story, Lavan comes out cleaner. Leah Sachen in Komenu is a very big piece of musar to Yaakov. Maybe in your house, you dress up like an older brother and steal Rachel. We don't do stuff like that here. All right, the Midrash picks up on that. Yeah?
Could it be that, considering how crazy these ages are, could it be that in the time of the Tanakh, the period of time, a year is not the same year that we have today? Meaning, it was not 365 days, it could have been a lesser amount of time, considering that you're saying that a 60-year-old wanted to marry a 5-year-old?
Well, remember, all the numbers are relative, so even if you want to say a year is a week, then you still have a huge gap between them. I have heard somewhere of such a theory, not of such a small amount, but of saying that the years in earlier parts of Bereshit, with the 900-year lifespans, actually represent something different than the years we talk about. The problem is, once you do that to Tanakh, there's nothing to study anymore. Right? Because once you say that, 5-year-olds then were like 60-year-olds now, then there's nothing to discuss anymore, and there's no reason to put any ages down. So we have to work with what we know. That's a good point. When Yaakov makes the agreement with Lavan, after Yosef is born, they make an agreement that has to do with the flocks. And what does Yaakov say? He said, okay, my sons will take care of my flock, and I'll watch your flock. But these kids are like 8. Right? I mean, okay, again, you want to say 8-year-olds then, but it's pretty bizarre. It gets worse because when the family comes back to Israel, I'm following Seder Olam, when the family comes back to Israel, it's only a couple years after they left, and the sons, independent of their father, negotiate with Shechem and Hamor, fool them, and 2 sons massacre the entire town. And these guys aren't even bar mitzvah yet. Okay? Which I guess gets them off the hook for, okay. In any case. Alright? I'm going to keep piling on the questions because the truth is when you look at all of the stories from Yaakov's time with Lavan and his return up until Parshat Vayeshev, almost everything becomes problematic. What's the very famous thing that Reuven did that lost him the Bechorah? He did something with Bilhah of a sexual nature, whether he actually took her or moved the bed. I don't care about that. Point is, he intervened to try to control the sexual politics of the family. And that's a model that we've seen with David and Etshalom. We may have seen it, I gave a shiur here a few years ago, with Cham, if you remember. That may be what Cham was doing with Mrs. Noach, right? To take control of the family through that method. But according to this, Reuven's 14. Now, I know you're going to say 14, girls matured way faster than men. We find girls getting married at the age of 12 and 13, and the men are at 40 and up, because they're still building up capital. There's a 14-year-old boy to say, I'm taking over for father now, is very strange. It's very strange, and it's not the Reuven that we picture, meaning when we meet them in these stories, we're picturing young adults. We're not picturing kids. What's Yosef famously called? It's called Ben Zekunim. So Ben Zekunim has several interpretations. Bar Hakim says Onkelos, what's the simple read of Ben Zekunim?
Child
Child in an old age. But according to Seder Olam, Yosef is only 7 months younger than Dinah, and only a year and a half younger than Zvulun. So Ben Zekunim, okay, but not by a big amount. Ben Zekunim, we usually assign to families that have like 3, 4 kids, and then like 20 years later they have another kid. That's the Ben Zekunim, right? And the whole psychological workup about the way Ben Zekunim was treated, etc. All lots of fun. But the real problem, of course, is the chart. So I'm going to make a suggestion.
It wasn't 60.
What?
It wasn't 60.
I'm going to make a suggestion, then we'll start with that. I'm going to make a suggestion about how we configure what has happened here. The suggestion is going to rest on the fact that I have not been able to find anything in the text to directly challenge it. It definitely goes against Seder Olam, but in this community I found that nobody seems to be too bothered by that. And it depends on reading Yaakov's words with which we started when he's facing off against Lavan, reading them very carefully. You notice, we'll start with that, Yaakov says, it's in source 2, Ze esrim shana anochi imach. What does that mean?
20 years on.
20 years I'm with you. And then he describes how loyal he's been. And then he says it again, which is, by the way, a little overkill. Ze li esrim shana, but he says it differently. What does he say? Beveitecha. Arba'asrei shana b'shtei v'notecha v'shei shanim etzonecha. I put the ellipsis in. So I'm going to make the following suggestion. Stay with me for a minute on this, and then throw the questions. Yaakov is around 40. What does Esav do when he's 40? Gets married. What did father do when he was 40? Got married. Yaakov needs to get married. But right about that time, if you take a look at the back page, source number 4, Vahi Esav and Abayim Shana, etc., and the very next pasuk is Vahi Kizaken Yitzchak Vatichen Einav Merot. I'm going to suggest that happens here. Yitzchak is 100, boys are 40. And by the way, any age you give to Esav, same as to Yaakov, that's what works with twins. And he's 100. The whole Aveo, Yitzchak lives much longer. He thinks he's going to die, but he lives much longer. What happens in that scene when Yitzchak feels like he's old and about to die? He tells Esav to do what? Hunt, bring the game so that I can. Says bracha. Rivka has Yaakov go in and get the bracha. What does Esav do when he finds out? He wants to kill Yaakov. What does Rivka tell Yaakov to do? Run away. That all happens then, that day. So I'd like to suggest that Yaakov's around 40. Maybe Esav got married 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks earlier, a year earlier. But Yaakov's 40, 40-ish. He's about to get married. Maybe he'd marry a local girl. But in the meantime, what does his father tell him? Go to Lavan and marry one of his daughters. That's what Rivka said to Yitzchak. If Yaakov marries one of the local girls, I put my head in the oven. And so Yitzchak says, go to Lavan, Achi Imecha, and go marry one of his daughters. It's time to get married. And so Yaakov goes, and he goes up there. And he arrives there when he's, Nagid, 42. I don't know. And immediately meets Rachel. Now, by the way, 5 years old anyways I'm bothered by. I'm a lot less bothered by 42 than 84. Because 40 is a natural age for men then to get married. They built up their capital, they're ready to get married. He meets Rachel. And this is exactly what father told him to do. Bat Lavan, beautiful, it's great, I like her, she's a shepherd, I'm a shepherd, what a beautiful family. We'll have lots of sheep. Lots of kids, I guess. And so he makes the agreement, wait 7 years. He works for 7 years, he marries her, but switch, it's Leah. A week later he marries Rachel. And with the march of time, they're not having any kids. And with the march of time, Yaakov's favoritism for Rachel shows, and Hashem sees that Snua Leah, she's disfavored, and so he grants her children. She has Ruvain, a nice 9-month pregnancy. They wait a little while. She has Shimon, a nice 9-month pregnancy. They wait a little while. And finally, Rachel turns around, after this has been going on now for quite a while, and says, Hava Livanim. So then Bilhah gets into the picture. In other words, this is going on for a while. Now, by the way, what happens after 14 years, after which point there may be 4 or 5 kids? He moves on. Where should he go after 14 years? Where should he go? But we have a problem, which is, what did Rivka tell him privately? Publicly it was, go get married. What was the private message? You better get away from Esav because he's going to kill you. Ad shuv af achicha mimcha v'shalachti u'lekachticha misham. What did Rivka tell her son? I'll come get you. Hasn't gotten the message. Which in his mind means Esav's still angry. So I better stay here. So he stays in Haran. He's his own man. And maybe he's not super successful. But what happens is, finally when Yosef is born, he comes to realize that Rabbi Soloveitchik made an amazing observation about the birth of Yosef being the connector here. Yaakov knows the family tradition. He knows a family tradition that goes as follows. Now, please be Yaakov for a minute and read this tradition. Hear this tradition that was given to Grandpa. Ger Yezer Acha Be'eretz Lo Lahem. Va'avadum v'yinu otam. Arba Mi'ot Shana. We know Arba Mi'ot Shana doesn't mean Arba Mi'ot Shana. We know it means a long time. V'gam et hagoy asher yavodu dan anochi. V'acharechei nitzu b'chush gadol. V'ata tikaver b'shalom tikaver b'sevra. V'ata tavol avotach b'shalom tikaver b'sevra tova v'dor revi'i yashuvu haina. Dor revi'i. So now, Abraham, Yitzchak, me, and since Rachel is the only one I consider Ishti, take a look at the beginning of Vayigash, Yosef, Dor revi'i yashuvu haina. Which means, Ima's not calling me, maybe Ima's dead. But the message is there, it's time for me to go back. And so he comes back to Lavan and says, it's time for me to leave. And Lavan evidently has some control over the family because Hava et Nashai, right? And Lavan says, no, Anopenotay, but right? There's a tussle over that. And they finally make an agreement. And for 6 years, he works back with Lavan to get control of some of the flock. And he's successful. And then finally he leaves. After decades and decades and decades of being gone, not 20 years. But 20 years is accurate. That's how long he was working in partnership with Lavan. And that's why he says, first, Esrim Shana Anochi Imach, and then he breaks it up. Esrim Shana Libe Beitacha. Arba-asrei Shana B'shtei V'notecha, and separately, Shei Shanim B'tzonecha. And in the middle, another bunch of years. Now everything starts to fall in place. A, Yaakov is not so old when he starts to go get married. He's at the normal age of marriage. B, the births are not happening at some stupendous rate. C, Yosef indeed is a Ben Zekunim. He's born way after the other ones. D, the brothers are old enough to watch the flock when he separates from Lavan. E, the brothers are old enough to negotiate with Shechem and Hamor, fool them, and then lead a massacre. The picture that we get is now of young men in their 20s and 30s with a little brother. And then, on the road, he had another brother when Rachel dies. All of the questions that we had about the numbers, about the timing, about the ages that we're picturing fall into place. Because remember, there's only one hard number that we have, and that is that Yaakov is 91 when Yosef is born. But we don't know how much younger Yosef is than the rest of his brothers. We don't know how old Yaakov is when he arrives. We don't know how old Yaakov is when he separates from Lavan, if indeed that happens as I'm suggesting. And so I'm suggesting that we take a much broader view of the time period that he's there, and have Yaakov not wait until some advanced age to begin thinking about a family, but to do it in a normal span of time. And then all of the difficulties that we have with this text seem to fall into place. Okay, give it your best shot. Go ahead. I come to this community not to just say, I come to also to have to defend. Yeah.
Sorry, so understanding that he worked, Yaakov worked for about 14 years.
That's clear, yeah.
And then in addition, 20 years of...
Six more. I'm saying they're not contiguous. There's a break. That's what I'm saying. The 20 years is right there in the text, the 14 for the girls and 6 for the son, right there in the text. I'm just doing this. And saying there's another few decades in the middle where he's working there. Yeah.
So he's saying it's technically a little bit 40 years.
What?
He's saying those stories happening in 40 years, not 20 years. Like everybody.
Could be 40, 50 years it's happening.
So the 6
Right.
is not 6? Is that what you said?
The 6 is 6. What I'm saying is there's 14 years, the first 14 years that he's there, he's working for Leah and Rachel, and he's paid off his debt.
Okay.
And now he moves to somewhere else in Haran,
Okay.
and continues to be a shepherd because mom never got him the message to come back.
Okay.
So he stays there, and he stays connected to the family, but he's working for himself. When Yosef is finally born at 91, then he turns around and says to Lavan, it's time for me to go back, because that's his sign, it's been time to go back. And then they start making negotiations. He works for 6 more years with Lavan. 14 plus 6 is 20, but like this.
And he doesn't have to write down.
What?
And he doesn't have to write down those 4 decades that he waited.
Exactly, because his whole point is about his relationship with Lavan. Remember, when he's negotiating with Lavan at the end, it's not about whatever he's done elsewhere in Haran. It's about his relationship with Lavan. I've been loyal to you. I've been good to you. Why are you treating me this way right now?
It's difficult to say that he would ask permission to go if he already left for a few decades.
Right.
That's true. But he
That's
does
a
have
challenge.
this
Good. Yeah. So the issue is one of region. And let's take it back a step, because there's another thing about Lavan Yaakov that we have to look at. I started, towards the beginning of the show, I asked the question, why is Rachel tending the flock? I didn't address it. But it actually is critical to understanding the relationship between Yaakov and Lavan, and also part of this shiur. Why is Rachel tending the flock? Because there's no boys in the family. If the boys in the family, they'll tend the flock. And Haraya, who does Yaakov first meet in Haran? Ro'im, not Ro'ot. He meets male shepherds. And he says, Hayatemet Lavan ben Nachor, Yadanu, Shalom lo, V'irei Rachel ba'at v'ito, Ba imatzon. As we say in my house, Rachel bito ba imatzon. Alright, so he sees Rachel. Now the question is, why isn't Leah? If Leah's older, why isn't Leah shepherding? Because Leah's a girly girl. Right? Leah's nice. She's like Einayim Rakot, very soft, very light. On the other hand, Rachel is a little bit more, perhaps tomboyish, maybe.
Also younger, so that's
What?
what can do.
And, well, Leah's also young enough to do it, you know.
But she's older.
But she's the older girl, maybe she gets that kavod, not have to, it could be. But there's no sons. How does Lavan look at Yaakov? And to do what? But more than that. He is taking him in as a son. He's taking him in as a son. What is Lavan's vision of this relationship? He will be the one to take over. And he engineers something brilliant, which is, he marries not only one daughter, he marries both of them. He can't leave, right? Which means that even if Yaakov stays on the property, but is working for himself, or even if he moves slightly away, Lavan still has his cause in him, family-wise. Right? And by the way, what does Yaakov say? Havayit, as if Lavan has some control over them. So he's never really left. But he's separated for business purposes. And he's been there for a while. And the 20 years he's talking about is how long he's actually been in business relationship with Lavan, because that's what the whole Reeve is about.
Could have expanded the business.
What?
Could have expanded the
He
business.
could have. He seems to not have been super successful wealth-wise, unless he's got some sort of angle that he wants to get some of Lavan's sheep besides his own wealth. But he's very wealthy by the time he leaves. Yeah.
How old is Lavan at this time when Yaakov is asking to leave? Yaakov is 97.
Right. Well, 91. He leaves at 91. They have to fight when he's 97. Right.
Right, so he leaves at 97.
Right.
So Lavan has got to be older, I would assume.
Maybe. It's even possible that he's younger, because think about this. If Lavan, hold on, time out. If Lavan marries at a younger age, it's possible that he has a couple daughters, and it's possible that he is the same age or even a little bit younger than Yaakov, even if Yaakov is in his 40s. Certainly if Yaakov is an old guy, right?
Lavan's got to be around Rivka's age.
Lavan's got to be a little older than Rivka. Correct.
Presumably around that age somewhere.
Good. And if Lavan's around Rivka's age, that makes... she's... Okay, so he's going to be an old guy. You're right. I take that. Lavan's got to be at least 120. Okay? We're not told Lavan's age. We're also not told when he dies, or how old he is when he dies. We're told the last time we see him. Now, Lavan doesn't sound like he's dying, because he takes off after Yaakov, and second of all, he makes a breed with him, which doesn't sound like I'm handing this off to my kids, although his kids are there, his sons are there, because he has sons show up later, right? He has sons later on. But he does sound like I'm going to stick around for this breed. So it could be Lavan lives to some crazy age. Remember, we have crazy ages in Bereshit, even in the later part of Bereshit, like, Yaakov's 147. In our world, that's Guinness. Right? Yeah.
We're assuming that Rachel is at the age of 5 when Yaakov gets her, just because Lavan says that you need to wait another 7 years. It's not necessarily because Lavan is seen as a tricky man, so he could have just been saying you need to wait another 7 years just to get more work out of Yaakov.
Okay, so we're assuming two things. I hear the question. Good question. First of all, we're assuming that Lavan is a tricky man. I don't know that Lavan's a tricky man. Matter of fact, when I see what Lavan did with Leah and Rachel, I think he's straight up. And he says, the minhag makom is, when there's two sisters, the younger sister doesn't get married before the older sister gets married. Yaakov, you should have known that. Right? Second thing is that even if we call him a tricky man, he would have to be something of a heartless tricky man, which we have no reason to think in the text. I'm not going to Midrash. In the text, to lock his daughter up for 7 years of non-marriage just because he wants to stick it to Yaakov. I mean, that's pretty cruel.
He wants to make money off of him.
That's called sticking it. I know, but he's using his daughter for that.
People do that. Use their children for money.
I'd like to see. I'm not going to assume that about anybody until I see pretty solid proof.
Why are you saying he married her a week after?
What?
Why are you saying locking her up?
No. What he's asking is, just to be clear. Time out. What he's asking is, who says Rachel was 5? Maybe she was already 15. Right. He says 7 more years.
7 more years to work for her.
No, but that means
he marries a week later.
Not a week later. He marries her 7 years later. Nothing happens to him for 7 years.
To marry initially.
What? Initially, every time. There was nobody getting married till he worked for 7 years. Which means, whatever girl's getting married is going to sit around unmarried for 7 years. So if you think that this girl is already 14 or 15, to lock her up for key childbearing years and not have any kids is just, it's beyond cruel. It's also sort of self-defeating. It's not a productive model to use in any case. Alright? And I don't have any reason to think that Lavan's that kind of person who's self-destructive in that way. Take his own daughter, he's only got 2 daughters, right? Take his own daughter, and to lock her up for 7 marriageable childbearing years and have her not be married doesn't make sense.
He wants the guarantee payment. His cash up.
What does that mean, guarantee?
He is. He's guaranteeing the Yaakov's work for 7 years.
Then how come he doesn't hold Rachel for another 7 years after Leah? Instead, he marries off a week later.
Because he couldn't get away with it, and he
couldn't get away.
It's straightforward. He could have told Yaakov, "You're not getting Rachel. You have to marry Leah first." He didn't do that.
Right.
But he switched it at.
Because
that seems like a trick.
Because at that, let's think about this. Stay with me for a second. Rachel's, let's say 5, 6, 7. Okay, I'm going to go as far as 7. I'm not going any higher. 7. Let's say Leah's 9. Okay, the assumption that everybody here assumes is by the time it comes to 7 years, Leah will already be married. Surprise, surprise! Yaakov turns around and wants to marry Rachel, and indeed Leah is not yet married. And he should have known at that point. The local minhag is to marry the older daughter first. Now, if you're going to say that, hold on a second, if you're going to say that Lavan is going to hold out for payment, then he could have turned around and said, "Oh, you can't get Rachel for another 7. Hold on a second, you can't get Rachel for another 7 years." He doesn't say that. I'm not saying Lavan's the most honest guy in the world, but he doesn't say that because why would he do that to his daughter? That's the question. And he has Yaakov locked in anyways, and Yaakov is loyal to it. He stays for another 7 years. So I don't understand why he would, if Rachel, when he first met Rachel, if she was already of marriageable age, why would Lavan say, work 7 years, then marry her, which means he's locking her up for 7 years of singlehood when everybody else is married.
So he didn't know who Yaakov was at first, and he wanted to establish that trust. You build credit.
Then I'm going to say, Alecha al-Chacha. You got to prove that about Lavan, because I don't see anything in the text that supports that. Yeah.
I was just checking the possibility. It's actually Yaakov who suggests the 7 years, not Lavan. Yaakov says,
which, by the way, then proves the point even stronger.
Well, it depends. Then we have to go to Yaakov's motivations. But I think
because
we're basing the whole thing on Lavan's motivation.
The simplest thing would be, I mean, thanks for pointing out, the simplest thing would be that Yaakov looks at her and says, she's 7 years away from marriage, I'll work for 7 years till I marry her.
No,
I mean, if she's already 12, let's say...
This is already the second.
No, this is the first.
Oh, the first.
Right? The simplest thing would be that Yaakov looks at her, he sees a young girl, he says she's about 7 years away from marriage, I'll work for 7 years. Doesn't make any sense if she's 15 to say I'll work for 7 years and then marry her. Why would the father agree to that? Rabbi, you just, thanks. Okay, good. One more question and then there's more food. Yeah.
Okay, so for the gap years, either he's working on his own or he's working for Laban. I have a question on either option.
Wait, during the intervening years.
The years you want to make up.
The ones I made up, right. I think he's working on his own or for somebody else.
He's working, he didn't go to Sheva, but according to...
What?
He didn't go to Yeshiva for that time. He's saying he's working.
Right?
Okay. So, either he's working for Laban. So if he's working for Laban...
I don't see how that can work.
Saying, if he's... Okay, but finish. If he's working for Laban, then Laban would have mentioned it when he's fighting with Laban. He wouldn't say Zerslim Shanav.
Right. Great.
If he's working on his own, he tells Laban, Matai Yaseh Gam Anochi Lebeti.
Right.
If he's working on his own for as many years, what does that mean? He's working on his own, he made his own money.
Good.
So how would you interpret that?
Good. Good question. One way to interpret it would be that what he means here is that he wants to have, shall we say, take a chelik of Lavan's own stuff that he worked for 14 years and have a piece of that, because that's how it plays out. Second possibility is, maybe, and this is what I said before, maybe he just wasn't that successful during those intervening years, because now he comes back and he says, I now have to make money for my family. We don't know what he did. But I just find it very difficult to accept the premise that A, he started all of this so late, and B, he got all of this done in 20 years. And I'd rather have the difficulty of explaining, and I do have that difficulty, explaining Mataya Senochi Leveti, which speaks to either some sort of desire to get at Lavan's wealth, or else to say, I just haven't been successful in these intervening years and making enough money for my family, as opposed to all of the challenges that we have if we crunch them in 20 years. My biggest problem is the births like this. But there's also other problems. These little kids doing all the things that they're doing, and Yaakov hanging out for so long until he starts to get married. It's very difficult. So, I'm not saying it's a solution without its own problems, but I think it leaves us with far fewer problems than the traditional approach.
Could it be that he was referring to land when he said, like maybe I want a piece of land, you have your piece of land?
Yeah, so that takes us to a whole different shiur, which is the Trafim, which I'll do next year. Thank you, Shavuot Tov.